Welcome to the Reconciliation Conversation. We want this podcast to be a space where we can expose hate, encourage love, equip for healthy reconciliation, and emphasize unity so that all people can know their value together as one. And welcome to another episode of the Reconciliation Conversation. As always, it is a pleasure to be here. Derrick DeLain with my good friend Jason. Jason, how you feeling, man?
Feeling good, man. Feeling good. Glad to be on here with you this week and really excited about our guest, especially in light of the current time and current moment and even the election coming up in November.
Yeah, no doubt. I 100% agree with you, man. The reality with our cultural moment right now, leading up into November, man, there's a lot to discuss. And so we're excited to have our good friend Justin Giboney on today. Justin, how you doing today, man?
Doing good, Derrick, man. Thanks for having me. I'm excited about the conversation.
Yeah. So Justin, real quick, man, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Introduce yourself for our listeners. That way, for those who may not be familiar with who you are, why don't you give us a little quick bio?
Sure. I'm Justin Giboney. I am an attorney and political strategist. I'm also an ordained minister and the president of the AND campaign.
Well, again, man, we're excited that you're here. Man, we want to jump right in. Right, we understand and know that there are a lot of subcultures here in America, and the reality is we also know that a lot of those subcultures, especially with what's been going on right now, a lot of people are having the conversation. What would you say they would have to desire for that the culture at large to move towards reconciliation and unity together? What are those things that they should be desiring? What would you say?
That's a good question. I think, we first have to start with the church. And so I'll kind of start with where we're at. And I think in a lot of instances, it's a matter of humility and just kind of openness to hearing other people out. So if we start with kind of the majority church, I would say, one thing they're going to have to desire or be able to accept is just the history of everything that's happened in this country when it comes to race, the failings that at times the majority has had when it came to the civil rights movement. I mean, if you're talking about conservative Christians during the 60s, it was pretty much an abject failure when it came to civil rights and things of that nature. That's something we have to deal with. But we also have to look at how that culture has changed since that's happened. But just like the gospel has it, God asked something of everyone, not just of one side. And so I think while there may be, a heavier burden on one group just based off the history and power dynamics of this country, I think everyone has to find a sense of humility and go into these conversations about race, not in a posture of self-defense, but more so in a posture of self-examination. And openness and having grace. And so in order to find kind of a oneness, we need to be able to sit down and have a conversation. If everybody's going into a conversation about race or other issues, trying to come out of that conversation looking faultless, well, then that's how you end up where we are today. But no one came out of a conversation with Jesus faultless. And so we need to be able to recognize that and correct ourselves.
Let's talk about politics for a minute. I mean, that's what we're in this political moment right now because of the election coming up. Would you agree? Do you think that the current system, political party system, is broken? And regardless of whether you do or you don't, what do you really think is the future of parties? And how do we kind of reimagine what this looks like from a political perspective?
Yeah, we talk about this in our book, which is Compassion and Conviction, came out last month. And yeah, I do think that the party system is broken. There's no mention of parties in the Constitution. Many of the founders were very wary of parties, but yet we've pretty much had a two-party system since the beginning. And I think it's hard to avoid. It is a broken system. It's something that's not working for the people. And so as far as the future goes, I think there will be some sort of a realignment. I mean, when you look at the Republican Party, there's a split. When you look at the Democratic Party, there's a serious split. And really the only thing holding that together is the president. But until that comes, I mean, we can't necessarily control that at this right now. But I think what Christians can do is control how they look at the party and how they identify with the party. And what we've suggested that Christians do is not put your identity into a party. And I think that's what makes people so frustrated. It's like, I can't fit into either party perfectly. And so I'm just not going to, really deal with it. And that's the choice you can make. I think there are practical benefits to being in a party if you are able to separate yourself. So one thing I ask people is when people critique your party, do you automatically feel offended? Well, if you do, then that probably means that your identity is too attached to the party. And I think we really need to be careful with that, because to me, a party is a tool. So, I've been a Democrat all my life, but you could say whatever you wanted to about the party. If it's true, I'm going to tell you it's true, because I'm just using it as a tool in my location with the people around me to get done what I see to be God's will in the political space. And I think that's a better way to look at it. But I do think there'll be some sort of realignment. I would love to see a third party or something pop up. It's just been very difficult throughout U.S. history to make that happen.
But this is the moment for it, right? Like, I mean, I think even looking ahead to 2024, this is the moment for it. And you'll laugh at me. I'm a URL junkie. So back in 2012, I bought the mosaicparty.com and mosaicparty.com. And I didn't buy it with political aspirations, because I don't have political aspirations to be a candidate for any particular office. I bought that URL though, because I kept imagining, anytime I would think about it, I kept imagining, what if there was this coming together of our broken pieces, right? That mosaic metaphor. Yeah. This coming together of our broken pieces that brought together a lot of what you talk about in your book, which we've recommended, we've reviewed, we've posted in our story. We appreciate the perspectives that you and Michael and Chris bring in that. Help our folks understand, and you just hit on it, but expound a little bit more on how we need to be thinking about our own choice in the political system. And our own ideologies. What's the healthy foundation and focus for that, so that we're not so tied with an identity and so offended and so defensive in our posture?
Yeah, I think you have to start off by knowing, you have to start off with a Christian foundation. So we tell people, one of the problems is that we've allowed our political affiliation to become religious in nature. Right. Yeah. And we almost follow that. We kind of let the politics shape our faith more than our faith shaping our politics. And so we want people to step back from that. And the way to step back from that is to really be honest about the faults in your party. Mm-hmm. One way to think about it is you're severely limiting your witness, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. If your public witness is kind of based on what they give you, if it's based on a framework that's handed to you by either party, you're severely limiting your witness, because both those parties are flawed. Mm-hmm. The process to create a platform, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of deals that you don't see going down. So anyone who thinks their party, people come up to us all the time, like, how could you be in this party or that party? I'm like, if you knew what goes on behind the scenes in either party, you wouldn't want to attach yourself to it so tightly. And so that's really what we want to see. We say, look, we're all brilliant at critiquing the other side. We lack those skills when we're critiquing ourselves. And so if you critique yourself honestly, then I think it would be obvious to you that you do want to create some distance. As far as the third party, I applaud those efforts. I think if this would be a prime time for it, if it's something that could happen. And so, whether it be the Solidarity Party, folks like that, I applaud what they're doing, because I like to see that kind of that moral imagination, that creativity to say, no, things could be different, whether they are right now or not. But I don't hold back on the fact that it's a very heavy lift. And maybe the first step towards that is just creating a coalition that's within both parties, right? To say on these issues, we're going to come together and we could care less what the party thinks about it. I think that's a smarter way to go about politics. But I applaud those efforts, and would hope that something that challenges the system would come up quickly. Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Jason.
I'll just, but real quick before you jump in, I want to ask. So, do you have plans for ever running for office?
I do not, and here's the reason. And I do get that sometimes, but I think when God kind of gave me and the other founders this vision, it was very clear that I needed to take any political aspirations I had out of it. Because I think those political aspirations would have taken away from what the AND campaign needs to do. Now I'm wondering, well, should I say this? Because if I run, then I may need to. I can just say whatever I want to say, do what I want to do, and clear, kind of create an infrastructure for others to do that. And so that's what I tell people. Hopefully I can create with the rest of the group, create an infrastructure and a new way of doing it, kind of a path and on-ramps for others to get involved. And I just don't think that's part of my calling.
Well, that makes me sad, but we all right. We all right with it. Well, listen, you mentioned a couple things. You mentioned, the coalition within parties, and then you just kind of hit on a little bit more in speaking about the AND campaign. Man, would you with as much detail as possible, break down what the AND campaign is, what they do, and why is that needed? Especially as Christians, as people who aren't following Jesus, why is something like the AND campaign needed? Yeah,
so myself, Sho Baraka, and a pastor here named Angel Maldonado, we are the founders of the AND campaign. And when we came together, what we were trying to do was address what we saw as a false dichotomy. We saw that what American politics was offering people was either you care about justice and you go to the left, or you care about moral order and you go to the right. And when you go to the left, you're going to have to surrender those biblical values that you have. If you go to the right, you're going to have to surrender that compassion and things like that. And so we just thought that was just a false choice, that we were being presented with a false dilemma that didn't have to be that way, especially when you look at the gospel. Because if you look at the walk of Jesus, you see compassion and conviction. You see a concern about folks in society and what people were going through, but also the understanding that you still had to set standards, right? And that there was absolute truth, that whether you had a sympathetic narrative or not, you still had that still applied to you. And I think that's what we were basing it on, especially if you go to Ephesians 4:15, Paul's talking to the church of Ephesus. He's saying that regardless of what's going on, false teaching, whatever, we have to be able to speak the truth in love. And so a light bulb sort of went off for me just studying that and saying, you know what, that's not just for spiritual matters or interpersonal matters. That's for how Christians interact with everybody in the civic space and everywhere else, to say it's about love and truth, not one or the other, and seeing how those two things are not mutually exclusive, but interdependent. And that we had to go into conversations with both of them, because if you have, love without truth, I think Tim Keller said that's sentimentality, right? It's loose. Love has no form without truth. The truth without love is a harshness, right? It's mean,
a wrecking ball.
Right. And so we need to go into the conversations like that, because if I love you, I do have to tell you the truth. I can't let you think that you can make your own reality. I don't think that's love. And so we felt like, man, we can build, a framework for civic engagement based on that gospel-centered perspective, and that's what we tried to do. So that's how it began. That's what we were addressing. And there's pretty much 4 prongs to what we try to do. We kind of talked about education, where we're trying to raise civic literacy and help Christians apply biblical values to the issues of the day. One of the most important things about when we're talking about education is helping Christians understand that you have to frame the issues for yourself. If you let your party frame the issues for you, you're going to end up in the direction they want you to be in, because they're going to frame it in such a way that to do anything else would just be unthinkable, right? So when it comes to abortion, when it comes to LGBTQ issues, when it comes to immigration, things like that, you have to frame the issues as a Christian through your biblical values. So that's part of the education process. We also talk about representation. When you watch, when you watch MSNBC, when you watch Meet the Press, when you watch Fox News, you don't see that type of perspectives that the AND campaign is coming with. And so whenever we get a chance, we try to go write articles. We try to be on panels just so people can see a different perspective. Someone once asked me, what would be the main objective of the AND campaign if you could accomplish one thing? And I think it would be just to be a model of what it looks like to bring compassion and conviction into the public square. If it's a kid in Lincoln, Nebraska or Montgomery, Alabama, for them to be able to look and say, oh, that's what this is supposed to look like. That's what Christian engagement is supposed to look like. If we did that, and nothing else, I think that would be helpful. So after representation, we talk a lot about what you guys talk about, which is coalition building and reconciliation, right? We think that the racial divide is coupled with a socio-political divide. And we can't get to the racial issues because we can't talk about some of those political issues and the history of those issues. And until we can do those things and talk about those things together, it's going to be hard to bring people together. At the same time, we see so much opportunity there because there's a critical mass of biblical Christians, and this is a biblical organization. We have a high view of scripture, small O orthodoxy, but there's a critical mass of biblical Christians on the right politically and on the left. And we think that if those groups came together, it would be really a coalition that you've never seen before. And maybe they leave their parties, maybe they don't leave their parties, maybe they just say there's things we can agree on. But that's the kind of reconciliation we need. And then lastly, it's just advocacy. We believe that until we can stand shoulder to shoulder together and advocate for things that may be out of our comfort zone but are biblical, then we're going to have a hard time coming together. So you see underlying this whole conversation of politics and all that, that's secondary. It's really about the church. It's really about unity and helping people, which is showing that we really love our neighbors.
Yeah, I love that. And that's what I pray, not just for my church, but just, the church in general, right? Yeah. 2016 was polarizing, man. It's like, man, how do we keep this, number one, the gospel as priority, right? But how does the gospel drip into every aspect of what we do, how we live, how we think, how we function, and it not be that we're trying to strangle each other, because it's we have to navigate these things in a biblical way. And so, man, I appreciate you guys leading the way in that.
No, absolutely. We talk a lot about, again, in the book, just putting things in the right order. And so we're very clear. This is a book about politics. I've spent most of my professional life in politics, but nothing is more important than proclaiming the gospel. And so that's a point that we make early in the book. This is not I social gospel. We're saying this is our primary purpose. But we are also saying, just because that's our primary purpose doesn't take away from the fact that we're supposed to do justice. It doesn't take away from the fact that the gospel has a social application. And that's really where we need to get, because some people are like, well, if we're going to proclaim the gospel, everything else is out the window. Nah, I don't know how you make it through Isaiah. I don't know how you make it through Amos and James and so on, and not think that there's an application that we're supposed to do, that God has placed things in our sphere of influence so that we could do the work of our master. That, those things go together. And I think we know that our works don't save us, but it is indicative of what's written on our hearts. And we have to keep that in mind.
That's good.
No, it's what exposes us, right? It isn't what saves us, but it is what verifies. And, because you think about, the Good Samaritan story alone is that element of Jesus's teaching that says, hey, this has to change the way that you engage with everyone around you. And so I love that, man. I love that you guys are fighting that fight and waving that banner. And I'm a registered independent and have been for quite some time. I can't remember if it was 04 or 08 when I did it, but I just got tired, like frustrated, didn't even want to vote anymore. To the point of this is just stupid. You guys can't even have a kindergarten conversation with each other to resolve something. And why would I vote for either party? Right. And that's where I was able to step back and say, okay, now I want to try to, as you said, I want to try to address it from perspectives that are not framed just by a one issue alone or one thing. It's interesting because and by the way, let me pause for a second, because you may want to give me a speech on how it's a cop out to be an independent. I don't know, but
I think I get it. I understand. Like I said, I think there's a practical side to being in a party, but I completely understand the rejection of that. I think Michael, my partner, would be a little harder on it, but I'm not mad at people as long as you're voting. and you're engaged, I don't think you have to be in a party or that you're ruining the system if you aren't. So hey.
Well, he's agreed to be on with us. He's agreed to be on with
bring
us.
Bring that up with him. He may be a
I
little.
will. I'll bring it up with him.
Hey, I'll sit here and moderate that one.
I'm curious. How did you guys, Chris, Michael, the co-authors of the book? So I understand sometimes some guys do more of the work than others when you do partnerships like that. So you don't have to call anybody out. But how did you guys? How did you meet? And what brought you together? And then I'm sure you don't agree on everything. So for our listeners, can you even give an example of what reconciliation has looked like for you guys as you were processing what to put in that book?
Yeah, I think we all met through mutual friends. And as far as me and Michael, I probably met Chris first, but I met Michael. He was doing a panel at Emory University. I'm in Atlanta. He was in from DC doing there. And one of my friends or somebody I knew said, hey, you should go check this guy out, told me about him. And there was just, when it comes to folks who are in partisan politics, there's just very few who have stepped up and said, I'm not going along with this. And so when people saw that, I think they kind of just placed us together. Same thing with Chris. Mutual friends said, hey, my guy's in Chicago. He's a Politico. You should meet him. And I think we all helped each other out to know one another and kind of embolden one another. And so it just all came together. We had different experiences. We had worked in different places in government, had somewhat different, perspectives to some extent, but the same theology. And so I think it really worked out. As far as writing the book, the reason that it's all three of us is initially it was supposed to be just like a curriculum. So we're going to make a big curriculum, give it to churches, say, hey, you can teach this, for your congregations. Because we had pastors saying they had folks in their congregations literally getting in fist fights, right?
Wow.
So we were like, man, it was just a resource for the church. And so we were like, man, this is going to be a big curriculum. We can just do it together. We went through Ivy Press, and they're like, you know what? It makes more sense to do it as a book. It can be the same type of resource for churches, but if you put it in a book form, it'll probably go, happen a little better. And so we put, questions at the end of the book. There's questions for each chapter. There's, little things you can do and with the church afterwards. And so that's really how it came together. As far as writing it, we just assigned chapters. And so, I'd be assigned certain chapters, Chris and Michael, and then we would just all review and have a conversation about each chapter. And just making sure that we're staying on hitting our deadlines and all that stuff. And it's really God, because I think it can be tough to do something like that with three people. But I think it was the time. The Holy Spirit wasn't going to let us get in the way, and the Holy Spirit, despite us, probably got it done.
That's good. Yeah, there's always that. When you got the couple or the three people working on something, and in college and high school, and that one person ain't picking up their weight. I'm glad the Holy Spirit was holding y'all together, because I know
it was good, man. They're all diligent brothers, man. We know we don't have a lot of time to waste, and that this is an urgent matter, and we're going about our Father's business. So it was a delight.
Love it. That's good. That's good.
It's so good. Well, before we wrap up, and this was an unprompted question. I didn't send you this, but as we're talking, it just keeps coming to my heart. So I want to throw it out there. Why does it feel? Why does it so often feel hopeless? You know what I mean? Like there's no other option. I mean, here we are again 4 years later, and I'm not trying to be ugly about the candidates back in 2016, but I would hear so often in 2016, I don't like either candidate. It just almost feels hopeless. Like this isn't going to change. What do you say to that?
No, that's a good question. I mean, I understand how people can feel hopeless when it seems like, the two choices are just getting worse and worse. They're not getting better. And I think part of the reason is because we've allowed folks at the extremes to be too loud, and we've sided with them too often and haven't chosen to push back against them. The folks in the middle a lot of times are called the exhausted majority because we're tired. But we got to get past that exhaustion. We got to catch our second wind and move forward.
That's right.
That's
and
good.
the thing that gives me hope is the opportunity here. The opportunity to very clearly present something that's different. To very clearly say, you know what? the gospel has to be more about my witness than winning this election. And so I'm going to vote. I'm going to participate, but I want my witness to speak louder than any win that any of these politicians will get. I think this has presented perfect chance, even with COVID and the racialized violence that we've seen. It's presented the perfect chance for Christians to say, you know what, we need to stand up and we need to do something differently because we're part of the problem and no one else has the answer. You know, when you look at the thing that gives me hope is when you look at, again, both sides, there's a critical mass of biblical Christians on both sides. And while nobody else can find common ground, we have more common ground than you could ever ask for. We got the Bible, we got the great commandment, we got the Great Commission. What more common ground do you need? And so it's time for us to see past all the ideological stuff, the partisan stuff, to deal with the history, but to really start supporting each other through it. And that's why the AND campaign, and you guys will hear about it soon, and would love to get you guys involved in Nashville. We are with a group of organizations, and we're partially facilitating it, called the Prayer and Action Justice Initiative, where we are bringing Christians nationwide together to address justice issues, to help churches that are struggling. So churches helping churches will have a phase 2. And we want to make sure that even when the media stops talking about these justice issues, when all that stuff calms down, that the church is taking leadership and still talking about it until it changes. So we're going to be calling on folks just like yourself in different cities to come together to make sure that that people know where the church stands and know that we're about the solution and that we have an answer that nobody else can bring to the table.
Man, I love that, Justin.
I feel like what I keep being whispered by the Spirit just to call to is just to pray for courageous leaders, and you guys are being courageous in what you're doing. And you don't have to have political aspirations from the standpoint of holding an office, which I respect and appreciate what you said earlier, that you don't want that to get in the way. Because if you're truly trying to create collaboration, you having those aspirations could potentially, from that ambition, get in the way of that. And I respect that. I think that's wise. But we do need courageous leaders, and we need them to be able. It's almost like we need a few guys and gals who'd be willing to say, "Here's my resignation letter. Here is my word in writing, and you can hold it up for all the world to see that I'll do 1 term or 2 terms and I'm out." Right? Like, we're not going to change we're probably not going to get term limits anytime soon. But I want you to know I'm not going in this for a career, but to truly try to cultivate for change. And I just hope for those courageous leaders, I mean,
I think that's right. I mean, I think a Christian, especially if you're in public service, should never serve unless you're willing to walk away and lose. Again, it's the same thing. Unless you're willing to lose, if you want to maintain the power, people are going to manipulate you all day. I mean, people know, if nothing else in politics, people know how to manipulate you when you want to be in power. You want, and that's what you're trying to hold on to rather than your purpose and your mission for being there. So I'm all for that. And I think we have to encourage folks to do that. We have to look at, what do we retweet? What do we give attention to? What incentives are we creating? And even if it's somebody we don't like, a lot of people don't run because of how we talk about people and how we treat people when they do run. And so a lot of people avoid it. And I was, in my time in politics, I was one of the main people who was doing stuff like that. So I'm not here to condemn people, but I'm here to say we all need to change and create different incentives and how we support folks. For instance, State Senator Katrina Jackson in Louisiana is a vocal pro-life Democrat, a vocal biblical Christian. Well, if you care about that and you want Democrats to be more pro-life, why wouldn't Republicans support her? Why wouldn't they do everything they could to give her a platform so that people see and hear her? But if you're too caught up on partisanship, then you'll never do it. Things like that really make a difference, because when you support her, now somebody in Mississippi might do the same thing. Somebody in Georgia might step in and do it. Somebody in Tennessee might say, you know what, I'm going to get support even outside of my party because I'm doing something different. But again, we got to have that moral imagination to see that things can be different and not be caught up in where we are right now. Love that.
So good. Yeah, you hit it right there. It's about reimagining that future for sure. And I'll admit, I have not followed her, and I will when we get off this recording. I will go and follow her, because I do think.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was saying she should be one of the most well-known Christian politicians in the nation, just based off the stances that she's taken and her willingness to go against the grain. So the AND campaign supports her as much as we can, but I think Christians all over the nation, if you want something to change, that's a change agent.
It's good.
People don't understand how hard it is to do what she's doing.
Yeah,
and when you do, you want to support it.
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about, right? That's courageous leadership. For her to say, you know what, I'm going to go against what my party in stereotypical fashion holds to, right? Like, I'm going to say this is what I believe, and I hold to these compassionate elements of who we are.
Exactly.
We need that kind of courage. That's good. Well, for our listeners out there, for those that are taking a new step and they want to really lean into this, maybe even though for those taking the next step, what's some practical suggestions you offer as we're wrapping up here together?
No, that's good. I think one of the things is just to listen, to sit down with people of color and listen to what they have to say. Don't go into the conversation in defending yourself. Just go in to listen. And that doesn't mean that everything somebody else says you have to agree with. But if you can hear their heart and build a relationship, you're taking a step that you haven't taken before. And then don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone at some point and advocate or talk about things that you normally wouldn't do.
Yeah.
All of us are going to have to do that at some certain point, and educate yourself. I'm not saying walk out there and talk about something you don't know about, but be willing to say, you know what, I didn't do this before, but if we all do what we're comfortable with, we stay in the same place. Make sure it passes biblical scrutiny, but make sure that you're reaching out and willing to sacrifice for people. One of the things that I talk about when it comes to reconciliation, we too often talk about reconciliation just through these kind of kumbaya sessions and coming together and having conversations. Relationship, fellowship is great. I will never undermine that. But until you're talking about policies, until you're talking about resources, I think you're kind of missing the point. Because you got to understand that a lot of these minority churches, minority situations, institutions are barely making it. And so it's great to have those conversations. And this is really what Churches Helping Churches was about. It's great to have those conversations, but what are you willing to sacrifice to show that love for your brother? And so that, I think that's a huge part of the conversation. And at some point, you're going to have to be willing to take that step.
That's good.
Really good.
So Justin, in closing, man, we want to direct people to you. Obviously we know you're on social media and campaigns on social media. Man, what are the handles so that people can give you guys a follow?
Sure. The big one is to follow the AND campaign on Instagram or Twitter. You can go to at AND campaign, AND campaign, and that's Twitter and Instagram. Then for a lesser page, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Justin E. Giboney, Giboney, at Justin E. Giboney on Instagram and Twitter.
If people want to get the book, which we want them to, if they don't, and if you don't know about Justin's book, you can go to at the Recon Convo and see what we posted about it, but you can find plenty about it at Justin E. Giboney or the AND campaign. Where does it help the most? Where does it help the AND campaign the most?
That's good.
And you guys the most for people to go buy it?
I would say you can go to Ivy Press. So InterVarsity Press, you can go to their website, or just get it from a small Christian bookstore. Order it from a small Christian bookstore. I think that now doesn't necessarily help us the most, but I think it helps those bookstores. And so I would appreciate that too.
Well, Justin, man, we want to say thank you very much for joining us on the Reconciliation Conversation, man. It was a pleasure to get a chance to hear from you, learn from you. Looking forward to our listeners doing the same as well. Thanks, brother.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining in on the Reconciliation Conversation. Remember, you can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the Recon Convo. You can also stay connected with us through our website, reconciliationconversation.com, or feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel under No More Night Media. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you next time.